In June, will the price of plywood drop even more? Actually, the price war started at the beginning of this year. There's no lowest price, only lower prices. The main factors affecting this are tariffs and the trade war.
China's plywood industry has a clear surplus in production capacity. Even though some manufacturers have shut down, there are still over 6,000 plywood factories in China, with an annual production capacity of 221 million cubic meters. With this overcapacity, China's plywood exports to the EU have been rising continuously. Recent reports show that the EU plans to impose high tariffs in response to China's plywood dumping. On June 10th, the European Union announced new temporary tariffs on plywood imported from China. The new anti-dumping duties will be as high as 62.4% on various hardwood species. The European Commission stated that this temporary tariff is being implemented because of the surge in hardwood plywood imports over the past 3 years, which has harmed local producers. According to data from Eurostat, the European Union imported around 750,000 cubic meters of hardwood plywood from China in 2023. Worth about 330 million euros, making up 30% of the EU market. Additionally, from January to August 2024, China's hardwood plywood exports to the EU increased by 23% year-on-year, reaching 837,000 cubic meters, with total export value increasing by 21% to $510 million. The average price dropped by 2.2% to $615 per cubic meter. The European Union pointed out that some Chinese exporters have been using a thin layer covering technique, where they cover the plywood with a very thin layer of softwood veneer to avoid anti-dumping tariffs. This accusation comes from the Greenwood Consortium, a group representing EU plywood manufacturers. In 2024, the consortium filed a complaint to the European Commission, alleging that Chinese exporters were classifying hardwood plywood as softwood products to take advantage of lower or zero taxes. The Greenwood Consortium welcomed the EU's anti-dumping measures. The European Commission stated that Chinese exporters using the veneer method have been able to classify their products under a customs code that doesn't require registration, while not changing the product's basic characteristics. Therefore, monitoring is necessary, and there may even be an anti-circumvention investigation to address such imports. According to reports, the industry group has long complained that Chinese exporters can bypass tariffs while making small modifications to their products or shipping through third countries. On June 11th, American economist Davy J. Wong told Foreign Media that this kind of practice by Chinese businesses is not only very common, but also a systemic industrial survival strategy. Chinese companies typically adopt 3 approaches. The first is physical changes, like in plywood, where they cover a hard surface with other materials to alter the export code. The second is reorganizing logistics routes. By passing through Southeast Asia, Mexico, or other intermediary countries, they can simply process and repack the products to obtain a certificate of origin from a third country. The third involves handling both legal and tax matters separately. One set of documents is used for customs declaration, while another set is used for accounting, creating a facade of compliance. This situation is not unique to China in global trade, but China has become a tool for stabilizing exports due to its execution capability, scale, and tacit approval from local governments and relevant departments. Researcher Shin-Ming Shi at Taiwan's National Defense Security Research Institute stated that the EU's anti-dumping tariff on Chinese wood products is the natural result following the US-China trade war. As Chinese products are no longer able to enter the US, they inevitably need to find other markets, and the EU is one of the few markets that can accommodate the volume of products previously intended for the United States. He noted that the EU has a large wood industry, and China's massive dumping of wood products in Europe will certainly cause a significant impact on European industries. Therefore, imposing high anti-dumping tariffs is a reasonable measure. Since October 2023, when the EU imposed anti-dumping tariffs of up to 45% on Chinese electric vehicles, the number of trade cases against China has steadily increased. This year, the frequency of such cases has particularly spiked. Currently, the EU has imposed anti-dumping or anti-subsidy tariffs on dozens of Chinese products, ranging from truck tires to decorative papers. Maria Martin-Pratt, Deputy Director General of the European Commission's Trade Directorate, said in a meeting on June 6 that the message to China is that the European market should not be taken for granted. She added that China has already realized that the EU has developed a series of defensive measures, which the EU refers to as a toolbox. One example of these tools is the anti-dumping investigation launched in May surrounding Chinese rubber tires. Analysts suggest this could eventually lead to Chinese products losing their price advantage in the European market. On May 21st, the European Commission announced that it had launched an anti-dumping investigation on tires for passenger cars and light trucks imported from China. The investigation stemmed from earlier complaints by the EU tire industry, which accused China of dumping products. The European Commission stated that the tire industry claims to directly employ 75,000 people in 14 EU member states and supports the EU's large automotive industry. However, tires for passenger cars and light trucks from China are being dumped into Europe at unrealistically low prices. The Wall Street Journal reported that the European Commission stated that if the investigation confirms that the EU tire industry has been harmed or is at risk of harm due to the dumping from Chinese dumping, and if it is determined that imposing anti-dumping duties serves the EU's interests, the Commission may impose temporary anti-dumping duties within the next 8 months. The investigation is expected to be completed within 14 months, at which point final measures will be taken. The report also mentioned that the EU has already imposed anti-dumping and anti-subsidy measures on bus and truck tires imported from China. The EU's passenger car and light truck tire market is estimated to be worth over 18 billion euros in 2024. The tire industry-focused website Yuanche Network has pointed out that this anti-dumping investigation is expected to have a significant impact on mainland China's passenger car radial tires, which are used for everyday civilian vehicles. According to Economic Daily, before the EU imposed anti-dumping and anti-subsidy measures on truck and bus radial tires from China in 2017, China's truck and bus radial tires accounted for 64% of EU imports. After the measures, it dropped to the current 14.5%. The EU is not the only region imposing anti-dumping measures on Chinese tires. Since 2024, Mexico has imposed a 14.8% anti-dumping tariff on Chinese tires. Brazil has increased the import tariff on passenger car tires from 16% to 25%. South Africa has initiated an anti-circumvention investigation on tires transshipped through Cambodia and Thailand. And the U.S. has imposed equivalent tariffs of 36% to 49% on Southeast Asian tire production. These measures have significantly increased the cost of China's tire exports. Under this multiple pressure, China's tire industry is facing heavy challenges. According to the China Rubber Industry Association statistics, in the first quarter of this year, China's rubber industry achieved an export delivery volume of nearly 43 billion by 6.6%. However, this growth rate is 9.1 percentage points lower than the same period last year. In addition to the anti-dumping investigation on tires, the EU has also announced that Chinese medical device manufacturers will be banned from participating in EU tenders worth over 5 million euros over the next 5 years. This was in response to China's refusal to open its tenders to EU businesses. In April of this year, the European Commission announced that it had imposed tariffs of up to 66.7% on aerial work platform machinery imported from China. This was because the investigation found that Chinese manufacturers benefited from unfair subsidies and sold their products at artificially low prices in the European market. According to Reuters, the EU's additional tariffs on Chinese mobile elevating work platforms will range from 20.6% to 66.7%, aiming to protect local manufacturers and maintain competitiveness in a market with an annual output value exceeding 1 billion euros. The investigation results show that Chinese manufacturers of mobile elevating work platforms have gained an unfair advantage through favorable financing, government subsidies, and purchasing raw materials at prices below market rates. From 2020 to October 2022, the market share of Chinese companies in the EU market increased from 29% to 41%, with their market prices generally being about 20% lower than local EU competitors. The new tariffs will apply to Chinese companies such as Hunan Shibang Intelligent Equipment Company Limited, Zoomlion Intelligent Aerial Work Machinery Company, and Zhejiang Dingli Machinery Company. In addition to the cases mentioned earlier, in March this year, the EU also launched an investigation acid originating from China. On March 14th, the European Commission announced that, following a request from EU companies, it would initiate an anti-dumping investigation into it from China. The preliminary decision is expected within 7 months, with the investigation lasting no more than 8 months. The China Trade Relief Information Network under China's Ministry of Commerce pointed out that the anti-dumping investigation request was submitted on January 28th of this year by 2 major European chemical companies, Langschuss Deutschland from Germany and Radici Chimica from Italy. According to the announcement, the investigation period for the dumping investigation will be from January 1st, 2024 to December 31st, 2024, while the injury investigation period will run from January 1st, 2021 to the end of the dumping investigation period. Adipic acid is one of the key petrochemical raw materials, primarily used in the production of nylon and other chemicals, as well as in the textile industry and the medical and food industries, as well as regulating the acidity of beverages. China is one of the world's major producers of adipic acid, accounting for 65% of global production capacity. Specifically, according to customs data, China exported 111,800 tons of adipic acid to the EU in 2024, a 60% increase compared to the average level from 2019 to 2023. This rapid growth has prompted the EU to initiate an anti-dumping investigation. On February 14th this year, the European Commission made a preliminary affirmative ruling on the anti-dumping case concerning decorative paper produced in China. It decided to impose temporary anti-dumping duties ranging from 31% to 34.9% on the involved Chinese companies. Among the companies, Huzhou Huawang New Materials Technology Company will face a 34.9% duty, while Zhejiang Xiaowang Paper Industry will face a 31% duty. Data shows that Huawang Technology is one of the few Chinese companies that master core technologies and have the ability to produce customized decorative paper in multiple varieties, ranking among the top in the global high-end decorative paper industry. As early as June 14, 2024, the European Commission launched an anti-dumping investigation on decorative paper made in China. The investigation period for dumping is from April 1, 2023 to March 31, 2024. The injury investigation period is from January 1, 2020 to the end of the dumping investigation period. Decorative paper is a type of industrial specialty paper mainly used for veneer decoration on engineered wood panels. The downstream industries primarily include engineered wood, furniture, flooring, etc. It undergoes special processing techniques, offering excellent decorative and functional properties, such as wear resistance, heat resistance, and fire retardancy. According to related statistical reports, China's decorative paper market is expected to reach 14.7 billion yuan by 2025. An article on Sohu News mentioned that this EU ruling has caused a significant impact on Chinese decorative paper exporters. On one hand, the anti-dumping duties directly increase the cost of Chinese decorative paper in the EU market, weakening its price competitiveness. On the other hand, the EU market is an important growth point for China's decorative paper exports, and the anti-dumping duties may lead to a significant decrease in order volumes. Another issue is that the profit margins for companies will be further squeezed, and they may even face the risk of operating at a loss. In addition to the anti-dumping measures on Chinese imports, the European Union has also taken action regarding China's blockade of rare earth exports. Due to China's suspension of rare earth exports, the automotive industry has issued warnings that production lines may halt. The EU has repeatedly urged China to lift the export restrictions on rare earth magnets for civilian use. Under the combined pressure of the US and the EU, the latest news shows that on June 11th, Chinese rare earth supplier Jinchang Magnetic announced that it has gradually obtained export licenses from national authorities, with export regions including the US, Europe, and Southeast Asia, excluding military-related business. Jiangxi Jinchang, permanent magnet technology company, listed in both mainland China and Hong Kong, is a major supplier for magnetic materials for electric vehicles worldwide. U.S. economist Davy J. Wang believes that the EU's recent actions are essentially strategic, an extension of its autonomous approach. On one hand, the EU does not want to be fully caught up in the U.S.-China trade war. On the other hand, the EU is becoming increasingly wary of the massive influx of Chinese goods, which could structurally disrupt European industries and employment. The EU's increase in tariffs will inevitably affect China's exports. Wang analyzes that first, it will directly impact China's low value-added export structure. Second, within the EU, there will be a stronger structural labeling of trade risks with China. And third, diplomatically, there are elements of aligning with the US, but with a tendency towards self-preservation. The series of tariff actions by the European Union are not short-term, but rather reflect a reality. China's export model, which heavily relies on the world factory approach, is facing widespread structural resistance. The EU's strategic stance between the US and China is shifting towards industrial self-preservation, regulatory battles, and national security. Currently, the US-China trade war is still going on. China's exports to the US have worsened, and the crisis has deeply entrenched itself. On June 9th, China's General Administration of Customs released data showing that in May, China's exports to the US dropped by 34.5% in US dollar terms, marking the largest decline in 5 years, second only to the economic stagnation caused by the pandemic in 2020. Imports from the US fell by 18.1%, totaling just 10.8 billion US dollars, and China's trade surplus with the US decreased by 41.6%, shrinking to $18 billion. What has drawn attention is that China's exports to the US in May amounted to only 28.8 billion US dollars, a nearly 35% year-on-year drop, which is much larger than the 21% decline in April when additional US tariffs on China were implemented. Commentator Wang He wrote that Trump's pressure on China was much stronger during his second term, and the uncertainty in US-China relations is extremely high, which has had a huge impact on trade between the two countries. Although the pause in the tariff war has not yet shown an effect in May's data, the recovery of demand and the adjustment of air freight capacity between China and the US will take some time. However, for foreign companies, uncertainty is a greater risk than tariffs. It is unlikely that the trade war with China will simply end due to the large trade deficit. Instead, it reflects his insight into China's ambitions and its real threat to the U.S. Through tariffs and other measures, the U.S. aims to weaken China's manufacturing power. From this perspective, as long as China doesn't change its course, the prospects for U.S.-China trade negotiations remain bleak. Additionally, as mentioned earlier, the European Union has frequently launched anti-dumping investigations or imposed tariffs on Chinese products this year. Surrounded by the combined pressure from both the US and the EU, China's economy has little hope. The US-China trade war will continue, and the rift between China and the EU will deepen. The EU will likely follow the US with further actions. China's status as the world's factory has been thoroughly undermined. If, amid economic downturn, China's political environment and institutional situation change, then China may truly find a way out.